Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything media network. Founder and CEO, John Michael, is reading a textbook, cover to cover. This textbook was copywritten in 2001, American World History. Yesterday, we started chapter 18. Interesting, pivotal time, because the chapter is titled The Enlightenment and the American Revolution. So we're getting there. Philosophy in the Age of Reason. This is yesterday. Couple of headings. Just going to go briefly over it. You can access that over here. Progress and Reason. Two views of the social contract. The social contract business. Listen up to it. Separation of powers. Philosophes and society. These philosophes, very important folks. You got Voltaire. You got Montesquieu. You have Wollstonecraft and Rousseau. And New Economic Thinking. Check that out over here. Let's look at Section 2, Chapter 18. The Enlightenment Ideas Spread. Setting the scene. Paris, the heart of the Enlightenment, drew many intellectuals and others eager to debate new ideas. Reforms posed one evening became the talk of the town the next day. Even an enemy of the Enlightenment admitted, an opinion launched in Paris was like a battering ram launched by 30 million men. Nothing like good old water. From France, Enlightenment ideas flowed across Europe and beyond. Everywhere, thinkers examined traditional beliefs and customs in the light of reason and found them flawed. Even absolute monarchs experimented with Enlightenment ideas, although they drew back when changes threatened the established way of doing things. The challenge of new ideas. This is a heading. Challenge of new ideas. The ideas of the Enlightenment spread quickly through many levels of society. Educated people all over Europe eagerly read not only Diderot's encyclopedia, which we talked about yesterday, but also the small, cheap pamphlets that printers churned out on a broad range of issues. More and more they saw the need for reform to achieve a just society. During the Middle Ages, most Europeans had accepted without question a society based on the divine right of rule, a strict class system, and a belief in heavenly reward for earthly suffering. In the Age of Reason, such ideas seemed unscientific and irrational. A just society, Enlightenment thinkers taught, should ensure social justice and happiness in the world. Censorship. Government and church authorities felt they had a sacred duty, to defend the old order. They believed that the old order had been set up by God. To protect against the attacks of the Enlightenment, they waged war of censorship, or restricting access to ideas and information. They banned and burned books and imprisoned writers. Philosophes and writers like Montesquieu and Voltaire sometimes disguised their ideas in works of fiction. In the Persian letters, Montesquieu used two fictional Persian travelers named Uzbek and Rika to mock French society. The hero of Voltaire's humorous novel Candide, published in 1759, travels across Europe and even the Americas and the Middle East in search of the best of all possible worlds. The best of all possible worlds. Voltaire slyly uses the tale to expose the corruption and hypocrisy of European society. Censorship is dangerous. Salons. The new literature The arts, science, and philosophy were regular topics of discussion in the salons. Informal social gatherings at which writers, artists, philosophers, and others exchanged ideas. The salon originated in the 1600s, when a group of noblewomen in Paris began inviting new friends to their homes for poetry readings. By the 1700s, some middle-class women began holding salons. In drawing rooms of the saloneries, middle-class citizens could meet with the nobility on an equal footing to discuss and spread Enlightenment ideas. Seems like a decent system. One of the most respected salons was run by Madame Geoffrin, Geoffrin. In her home on the Rue Saint-Honoré, R-U-E, Saint, H-O-N-O-R-E with an accent, she brought together the brightest and most talented people of her day. The young musical genius Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart played for her guests, and Diderot was the regular at her weekly dinners of philosophers and poets. Enlightened despots. What's a despot? Let's find out together. Discussions of Enlightenment ideas also enlivened the courts of Europe. Philosophers tried to persuade European rulers to adopt their ideas. If they could enlighten the ruling classes, they thought they could bring about reform. Some monarchs did accept Enlightenment ideas. They became enlightened despots, or absolute rulers who used their power to bring about political and social change. Frederick the Great. As King of Prussia from 1740 to 1786, Frederick II exerted extremely tight control over his subjects. Still, he saw himself as the first servant of the state, with the duty to work for the common good. Frederick admired Voltaire's work and lured the philosopher to Berlin to develop the Prussian Academy of Science. When Frederick was not busy fighting wars, he had swamps drained and forced peasants to grow new crops, such as potatoes. So, literal swamps drained, not figurative swamps drained. He had seed and tools distributed to peasants who suffered in Prussia's wars. Frederick also tolerated religious differences, welcoming victims of religious persecution. "In my kingdom," he said, "everyone can go to heaven in his own fashion." Frederick's reforms were directed mainly at making the Prussian government more efficient. He reorganized the civil service and simplified laws, but a rationalized bureaucracy also meant a stronger monarchy and more power for Frederick himself. Catherine the Great. Catherine II of Russia read the works of philosophers and exchanged letters with Voltaire and Diderot. She praised Voltaire as someone who had fought the united enemies of humankind, superstition, fanaticism, ignorance, and trickery. Catherine, who became Empress in 1762 of Russia, toyed with Enlightenment ideas. Early in her reign, she made some limited reforms in law and government. She granted nobles a charter of rights to criticize institution of serfdom. Still, like Frederick in Prussia, Catherine intended to give up no power. In the end, her political contribution to Russia was not reform, but an expanded empire. Joseph II. The most radical of the Enlightened despots was the Habsburg Emperor Joseph II, son of and successor of Maria Theresa. An eager student of the Enlightenment, Joseph traveled in disguise among his subjects to learn of their problems. His efforts to improve their lives won him the nickname the Peasant Emperor. Maria Theresa had begun to modernize Austria's government. Joseph continued her reforms. Despite opposition, he granted toleration to Protestants and Jews in his Catholic empire. He ended censorship and attempted to bring the Catholic Church under royal control. He sold the property of many monasteries and convents and used the proceeds to build hospitals. Joseph even abolished serfdom. Like many of his other reforms, however, this measure was cancelled after his death. Arts and literature. New heading. Arts and literature. Hope you're having a good day. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. Back to the reading. Arts and literature. In the 1600s and 1700s, the arts evolved to meet changing tastes. As in earlier periods, artists and composers had to please their patrons, the men and women who commissioned their works, and from them or give them jobs. Artists and composers had to please their patrons, the men and women who commissioned works from them or gave them jobs. Right. Courtly art. In the age of Louis XIV, courtly art and architecture were either in the Greek and Roman tradition or in a grand, complex style known as Baroque. Baroque paintings were huge, colorful, and full of excitement. They glorified historic battles or the lives of the saints. Such works matched the grandeur of European courts. By the mid-1700s, architects and designers developed the Rococo style. Rococo. R-O-C-O-C-O. Unlike the heavy splendor of the Baroque, Rococo was personal, elegant, and charming. Furniture and tapestries featured delicate shells and flowers. Portrait painters showed noble subjects in charming rural settings, surrounded by happy servants and pets. Isn't that nice? I like dogs. Middle-class audiences. A new audience, the growing middle class, emerged with its own requirements of art. Successful merchants and prosperous town officials wanted their portraits painted, but without frills. They liked pictures of family life or realistic town or country scenes. Dutch painters such as Rembrandt van Rijn, I didn't know that he had a name other than Rembrandt, such as Rembrandt van Rijn, R-I-J-N, conferred great dignity on merchants and other ordinary middle-class subjects. Trends in music. New kinds of musical entertainment evolved during this era. Ballets and operas, plays set to music, were performed at royal courts. Royal court meaning where the royals would hang out. Kind of like a rooftop in Manhattan. But that's for money. Royal courts were by invitation. I guess kind of like a rooftop in Manhattan, too. At some level, you know what I mean. Maybe you don't. That's all right. The music of the period followed ordered structural forms well suited to the age of reason. Among the towering musical figures of the era were Johann Sebastian Bach. A devout German Lutheran, Bach wrote complex and beautiful religious works for organ and choirs. Another German-born composer, Georg Friedrich Handel, spent much of his life in England, where he wrote water music and other pieces for King George I, as well as many operas. His celebrated work, The Messiah, combines instruments and voices, Today, it is a standard at Christmas and Easter celebrations. In 1762, a 6-year-old prodigy, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, burst onto the European scene to gain instant celebrity as a composer and performer. Over the next 3 decades, his brilliant operas, graceful symphonies, and moving religious music helped define the new style of composition. Although he died in poverty at 35, his musical legacy thrives on. The novels. In 1700s, literature developed new form for a wide audience. Middle-class readers, for example, liked stories about their own times told in straightforward prose. One result was an outpouring of novels, or long works of prose fiction. Still don't really know what the word prose means, and I have a degree in English. Goes to show what that taught me. It taught me a lot, actually. English novelists created many popular works. Dante Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, an exciting tale about a sailor shipwrecked on a tropical island. In Pamela, Samuel Richardson used a series of letters to tell a story about a servant girl. His technique was adopted by other authors of the period. Lives of the Majority. And then we will part for today. But if you've enjoyed this video so far, thank you. Please like and subscribe. And I hope to see you again. Lives of the Majority. Most Europeans were untouched by either courtly or middle-class culture. They remained what they had always been, peasants living in small rural villages. Their culture, based on centuries-old traditions, changed slowly. Peasant life varied across Europe. Villages in Western Europe were relatively more prosperous than those in Eastern Europe. In the West, serfdom had largely disappeared. Instead, some peasants worked their own patches of land. Others were tenants of large landowners, paying in yearly rent for the land that they farmed. Still, others were day laborers who hired themselves out to work on other people's farms. In centuries in Eastern Europe, however, serfdom was firmly rooted. In Russia, it spread and deepened in the 1700s. Peasants owed labor services to their lords and could be bought and sold with land. Yikes. That's okay. In Central and Eastern Europe, however, serfdom was firmly rooted. In Russia, it spread and deepened in the 1700s. Peasants owed labor services to their lords and could be bought and sold with the land. Despite advances, some echoes of serfdom survived in Western Europe. In France, peasants still had to provide free labor repairing roads and bridges after the spring floods, just as their ancestors had done. In England, country squires had the right to hunt foxes across their tenants' lands, tearing up plowed and planted fields. By the late 1700s, radical ideas about equality and social justice seeped into peasant villages. While some peasants eagerly sought to topple the old order, others resisted efforts to bring about change. In the 1800s, war and a political upheaval, as well as changing economic conditions, would transform peasant life in Europe. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy your day. Goodbye, and God bless.